welcome to a new episode of Insight with InMobi. It's a thought leadership video series where we celebrate the journey of the brightest minds looking after the most inspired brands here in Asia. I'm your host, Valerie Jaquet, and I'm the Director of Agency and Programmatic Business for InMobi across Southeast Asia. In today's episode, I have the pleasure to welcome Chris Packman, who is the Senior Director of Client Development APAC with GroupM. In his current role, Chris helped agency and brands navigate all things digital with a specific focus on proprietary and third-party data and tech. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. I'm very excited to have you on board, and I look forward to hear all your insights, feedback, thought on all things mobile programmatic ecosystem that we live in.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, Valerie.
How's your day going?
Going good so far, thank you. I think very busy. Everyone's very, very busy now in these times of working from home. Seems like your calendars are just meeting, and if someone sees a free slot, they just put it in there. But good busy. It's fun that way.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you taking some time to share like your thought, your idea, what you've been through in the last 2 years, particularly with this pandemic. And I think all of us can relate to the challenges, the opportunity that GroupM as an agency you've faced. And as a partner, I'd be keen to a little bit about your journey, what's been happening in the last 2 years, and how do you foresee 2022 coming through. So before we start digging into all those questions, if you can tell us a little bit about your journey, your career. You've got an interesting background coming from a law background, and you ended up in ad tech media. So I think you've been working in the industry for 16 years, and 7 of them has been in Singapore. So you probably have seen a lot of changes, a lot of disruption within the ecosystem. And I'd be interested to know what shaped your career. What have you learned, and share some of those knowledge insights with our audiences.
Sure. So that takes me back a long way. You're right. I have my background or degree is law and marketing. So I actually originally went to university thinking I'll be a lawyer. Earn loads of money and it's really interesting. But then throughout my degree, I thought, no, it's not that interesting. It's huge amounts of paperwork and not quite as you see it in films like The Firm. But the marketing bit, I really, really enjoyed. So we had lectures from loads of different brands, such as Diageo. There was a challenger brand, and that's the one I remember the most, which was very blatant about the fact that they just come in and they copy whatever the big brands are doing, and they can churn out in about 2 days a straight copy of their products. Fair enough, it'll be a cheaper version, and that's their business model. And I just thought that was a very interesting business model to have. But the marketing around it was probably the most interesting part, and that's really what spurred me to go into marketing. One of my uni friends at the time, actually a guy called Matt Drury, who works at Facebook now in Singapore, he went into a small agency called iLevel, and I saw the amount of fun he was having, and I kind of followed his tracks, but I went onto the sales side. So I started out in a publisher, a B2B publisher called EMAP, which had the glamorous titles of New Civil Engineer magazine, Ground Engineering, mainly B2B in the construction area. And it was a very different time. So I sold everything digital, magazines, exhibitions, and we had 250,000 page impressions each month on our site, which we sold every month via IOs. So it was an easier time, let's say. But then everything was moving digital. So I thought, well, actually, I need to move more into that space, and started working for another company which sold RSS feeds. So it was literally a 300 by 250 RSS feed being sold into Financial Times or Reuters. And we'd sell to all of the big agencies and large advertisers based on the fact that they were buying finance or they were buying sports, and there wasn't really much more to it at the time. But then that got me interested in digital and the ways in which you can reach users, which were a little bit more nascent back then. And programmatic was just coming into the limelight. I had no idea what it was, but I was approached by a company or a recruitment agent at the time, telling me about a company called the Exchange Lab. And they had a new technology, they said, which would work across multiple trading platforms, neither of which I had any clue about at the time. So I thought, well, we'll give it a punt. It's digital. It's where I want to go in my career. And to be honest, that was the defining moment for my career, because I then started as employee number 9 at Exchange Lab. And that was in the London office. And at the time, we shared an office with the trade desk. We didn't have a presence in the UK, but Jeff Green used to fly over with his colleagues. I think there was 4 or 5 of them at the time. And we'd go out with Jeff Green and try and sell or license the trade desk into other agencies. So I remember Jeff talking about the trade desk and saying, we're going to smash or we're going to crush all the other DSPs, which clearly they have pretty much done. So he was right in that part. But that really, that skyrocketed because programmatic became very, very popular. The agencies then started building their own trading desks at the time, in-house capabilities, and the whole area of programmatic became, I suppose, it was already complicated, but more complicated in terms of, what kind of technology can we use? What can we plug in as well for extensions from an audience targeting point of view? How can we report on this as well? And what can be done? And brands at the time and advertisers were trying to explore, push the boundaries in terms of what can be done. And then came a period of my life where I thought, well, I really love the Exchange Lab, I really love programmatic, but actually I do need change. Matt, who I mentioned earlier, had already come out to Singapore a few years earlier, and he kept saying, come to Singapore, it's amazing. I had no idea what Asia was like. I'd never been to Asia at that point. But just on a whim, I thought, why not? Let's have a go. So the guys at Exchange Lab, they were really great. They said, well, put it and see what you can do. And if it looks good, then we can look to open up in Asia, because we had some funding and wanted to grow the business. So I did exactly that. And back in, I think, January the 24th in 2014, I landed in Singapore and then started work the next day from my bedroom to set up and build that business here. So that was a very steep learning curve in terms of doing business in Asia, working with the agency groups which exist here, and also clients direct, learning about the different countries within the region, how different they are from each other, but also really what resonates from an ad technology point of view and what advertisers are looking for. I think my experience throughout is that brands and advertisers, they've always looked for the same thing. They've always looked for an audience, and they wanted to target that audience or those consumers in a way which is consistent and more memorable than the next brand. Everyone is competing. They have a set of business goals and values, and they want to adhere to those. And delivering that for them, whether it be via programmatic, print media, or any type of media, is the goal. And as long as you put those business goals at the forefront, I think, as long as you put your clients first and the consumer, their consumer at the forefront of that, then things will go well. So we tried to do that with Exchange Lab, and it did go well. And then we were purchased by GroupM at the end of 2015. So since that day, I've been part of GroupM, which has been a roller coaster ride, and a very good one at that. I've been involved with many different parts of the business, but always within the same kind of business unit, which started off as something called M Platform. And that was very much data technology within programmatic at the time. And has since then kind of morphed into what's called GroupM Services now. So our business unit, or the business unit I work in, looks after all activation for the different agencies across the region, across search, social, e-commerce, programmatic. We look after ad ops as well. And then there's a big part of that is data and tech. So looking at the specific data and technology capabilities, whether that's proprietary to the group or third party, it would best fit the business models and KPIs that our clients are providing to us, and really consulting with them and helping both our agencies and their clients move through this landscape, which has become very complicated, in fairness. Programmatic is supposed to make it easier, but it's done the complete opposite. We've brought acronyms in from DSP, DMP, CDP, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a complex space, and my job now is to help guide both our agencies and their clients through this space, really with whatever their business need is at the time.
I can actually relate to your journey, ended up being in an industry at the time where programmatic or digital media was quite nascent, and you just had to embrace all those change and keep learning, embracing, and pretend. It was like you fake it until you make it, to actually navigate, with partners, with clients, and bringing them value, bringing them in front of the consumer. So, which is interesting because, in the last 2 years, we've been facing a massive challenges with the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it's even more disruptive right now because this is something that we don't have any control over. And we, at the end of 2021, not sure how 2022 will unfold, but it's going to be like, keep adapting and going with the flow, with the way that we operate in the industry. So with the pandemic in mind, how did the pandemic accelerated digital transformation for brands, and how did you help them navigate, at the same time keep growing, and while mitigating the risk?
I think there's a lot to that question. So I suppose that the first part is the acceleration. Obviously, this is not something that certainly my generation or that I've seen in my working life. It is unprecedented in that respect for me and for many people around us. It's been very, very difficult, and it has really forced the hand of many advertisers to accelerate their digital capabilities. All of a sudden, their consumers were not in the same place. They were unable to go out, unable to travel. The same products that they would have bought before are no longer as attractive because they're just not a requirement. But actually, they're looking to fill those voids with something else. So there's a huge amount of opportunity, and also a lot of risk in that respect. So one business which could be established could all of a sudden find itself in an area where it's uncharted territory for them, and perhaps they've had the idea and the knowledge that they need to. They wanted to drive more digital and I suppose e-commerce in future, but maybe weren't ready to do it at that point. So really, what it's done is it's just added fuel to that that train which is already moving in for many brands, and just made it go a lot faster. So I think resource has been a huge challenge, and just making sure you've got the right people in place to, number one, affect this change and put it in place. And then you have the right partners in place as well, who can help the brand guide them through that, and also achieve their goals. So goals obviously haven't gone out the window. Every business needs to survive and has needed to as well. Many have had to cut costs, unfortunately, in some cases staff. In other cases, it's been actually very lucrative for them. So there's huge amounts of opportunity and then a lot of risk at the same time. And I think navigating that risk and opportunity has been the difficult part, because either the resources haven't been there, or it's been hard to navigate the resources when they are there. And then also, as we've mentioned already, it's a complex space. It's not one you can just jump into and be like, right, this is what I need to digitize. This is what I need to find my consumer online now. And when I get there, there'll be no one else there. I can just send an advert out and someone will buy it. That's not the case. There's a lot of competition now, and I think it's quite often referred to as noise, but I don't necessarily like that as an analogy in terms of it's not necessarily noise. It's just other people in the marketplace or other brands in the marketplace looking to achieve the same business goal. So it's a case of making sure that if you are brand advertising in this very busy and complex space, that you can be seen above the rest. So how do you do that? You need to look at your creative strategy. You need to look at the ways in which you are reaching users and consumers. You need to look at messaging which exists. And then there's also in the back end, if I'm driving someone to a site, then what's the functionality of that site? Is it easy to navigate? Is it easy to transact? What's the process in terms of customer service? So customer services had to change completely because we're not face-to-face anymore. There's so much which is involved in this, and I think that's forgotten sometimes from a marketing perspective, because it's easy to look at how you need to digitize and how you need to advance in that space, but then actually once you've made a sale, then there's always the after-sales care, or if something goes wrong in that element, then actually you can really damage your reputation because your orders aren't fulfilled, or someone is expecting to receive something on a specific day and it doesn't come. That may mess up their plans completely. It's quite deflating. So there's a lot that's happening on the back end that I think our clients and all advertisers have had to face. And our job in terms of navigating or helping them navigate through this is to make it easy for them, to make it as seamless as possible using our expertise and knowledge in the space, in digital space, to provide best practice or provide them with advice on which channels they should be using, which will be most effective. E-commerce has obviously exploded, in terms of hundreds of % in some markets and for some brands. And so the back end of that, as I mentioned before, is really, really important, and just as important as the first part. So making sure you've got the sales in place and you're reaching your business KPIs, but then also increasing brand presence, increasing knowledge of that brand within the consumer set, but also the loyalty to the brand at the same time. All of these elements are difficult to manage, certainly in the time when there's a pandemic and everyone is forced to work from home and you don't have that face-to-face interaction. But likewise, because the consumer mindset has changed dramatically. So I think from an agency perspective and from the media industry as a whole, I think everyone's had to work a lot harder in terms of the partnerships which are in place and being able to trust each other in terms of exactly what kind of transactions are taking place, and really knowing exactly who you can turn to if there is an issue, and to know that it can be fixed very, very quickly. But likewise, finding new routes and new areas or new channels where you can find your consumer, or you can find the inventory you need, depending on which one it is.
You said that, with the pandemic and how everything changed from big corporation to individual like you and I having to work from home, completely changed the work-life balance, the impact on the emotional, mental state, which is something that we don't really talk about in our industry. Like, would you say that you had to put on multiple hats, like more kind of consultative way, at the same time advisor, at the same time a seller, and trustee, all those different hats to support brands and help them to build new strategy based on the economical business goals, marketing objective that they had to put in place to drive sales, to drive awareness, to drive brand equity, all those objectives that they had in the last 2 years to survive or to thrive.
I wouldn't say we had to start doing it from scratch. It wasn't new. We've always done that to an extent, but probably not to the extent that we are doing now. It's just the questions which we used to receive every now and then. Now we receive them every single day. And it's made that bit more complex by the fact that there are massive changes in terms of privacy and the laws which surround those in the last few years. And also the way in which we track and will be able to target users is likely to change in 2023 if the cookie is deprecated. And then Apple and iOS 14 update means that tracking across mobile is becoming harder as well. So there's a lot to navigate. So you're right, you picked up on a lot of really good points from the pandemic point of view. And obviously it's been a really stressful time for everyone involved. No one would deny that. And I think as a company, we've worked together extremely well, and it was surprisingly easy to start working from home. A little bit alien at the start, and obviously quite difficult if people have kids or home-based learning is involved. That's very stressful. So making sure that our colleagues are aware that flexibility is there to ensure they can live their life in the most stress-free way possible, whilst also getting the job done that we've been tasked at hand, has been very, very important as well. And you mentioned that, I think, we don't talk about mental health that much as an industry. I think you're right. There's a lot. The pandemic has put a limelight on mental health and stress in the workplace or at home. But these are areas which are being addressed more now. But I think that, again, that's something which hopefully companies will be more sympathetic about. Actually, on Friday, we've got a kind of an off day just for that exact reason. Just for take some time off. Everyone's worked extremely hard. I think Nike in the US shut down for a week as well. So companies are reacting, but everyone will have a different situation at hand. And I think being sympathetic to knowing that no matter what happens, someone always has something going on. That's really important. That's both on the client side and with your colleagues as well. So that's something we've had to keep in mind as much as possible.
So with this in mind, how do you then foresee the future of the agency landscape, shaping up? We've seen like emergence of new ad tech platform, particularly in this side of the world where you had players like TikTok, Twitch, really aggressively expanding the team, growing, hiring. Every time I open up LinkedIn, I see people from an agency that moving to Twitch or moving to TikTok. In the past, it was like moving between agency and agency or publisher to agency, but now, the workforce in our industry is moving to those new platforms. So within GroupM, in your current role, how do you, educate brands to embrace those new ad tech platform, those new environment around gaming, metaverse, virtual reality. Then the whole topic of data privacy with all the changes that it's happening with cookieless future. How do you leverage on all these new changes from an agency perspective?
Okay, so I'll start with I suppose the first bit, which is the new platforms, etc. Again, I suppose this is nothing new. We've always seen new platforms coming. Some will be extremely successful, others less so. We have also, extremely specialist platforms around B2B areas. It could be which we use on a regular basis, but no one's really heard of. So I think from an agency point of view, the expertise which lie within the agency are speaking to all of these different partners and then finding those which are strongest for each of the different clients. No client is exactly the same. They all have different ambitions in terms of what they want to do, their business KPIs, who they want to use to do it as well. Some clients will mandate globally that we're going to use certain different platforms. Others will be quite open and say, look, each market is different and we need your expertise to kind of find that. So that's very much an ongoing conversation with all clients in terms of new platforms and testing and learning. I think test and learn is one of those areas which is most important right now because there's a lot of uncertainty in the future in terms of how to target and track and measure, how you can apply data and then collect data as well. So really testing the capabilities in each of the markets which exist in the moment. APAC has always been really good in terms of adopting, and e-commerce is a great example of this where it leads the way from an e-commerce perspective. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the platforms which exist are as advanced as some of the Western platforms. So there's always a balance to find in terms of what are the strengths and weaknesses of each platform. And really at that point, it's about analyzing them and then providing the information to our clients saying this is what we think is good for, etc. Or this is where we think is a weak area. And as a result, you should be using another technology on top of this perhaps. Or quite often, I think you can lose yourself in terms of platforms and tech and forget that the end goal is the consumer, taking the consumer into account and I suppose what the consumer feels and how they want to be targeted and how they're most likely going to resonate with an ad unit, or if that's the end goal or the message in that ad unit. You need to keep that in mind as well. So it's about having the entire marketing mix in mind, as opposed to just looking at one platform and saying this is going to solve all problems, because that's not the case. There's always different KPIs. And then you touched on data ethics and privacy. This has been forced into the limelight, I think, by GDPR, and there's multiple other different laws which exist now. So PDPA, Vietnam have their own law, Korea has their own law, California has a very strict law as well. I think being very vocal about adherence towards these specific policies which are in place and making sure that we're advising our clients on the way in which we work as a company around data, and then also having a very strong view on the way in which data is used. So as a group, we've been very vocal about data ethics, which goes a bit beyond the letter of the law. So just because you can use a piece of data doesn't necessarily mean that you should use that data. So I think an example of that could be if you collect data on lower income families, then should you really be using that data, to target with advertising to try and get them to buy something? There's an ethical compass which exists within that, and we've built one internally. We did that in conjunction with Unilever, which is now available to all clients, so that we can help them really navigate their tolerance to risk and towards those levels of ethics or the ethical use of data within the letter of the law, to really find out how they want to use it. Then naturally there's all the complexities with how do you collect that data, store the data, apply it to a campaign, how do you measure how effective that data is, the cost of the data. So a lot of consultancy work involved within that, and really a lot of elements around using data and applying it effectively and making sure that it's cost effective and again achieve the KPIs of the client, and helping navigate through that process is a huge part of our job.
So you spend quite a fair bit of time explaining data, like data privacy, data ethics, and how big it is with GroupM and with your current role. So on this subject, being also talking with brands, with agency partners on data strategy, this is right now like at the core of everyone's conversation. A lot of brands, they sit on a lot of data, and from the conversation I had, a lot of them also don't really know how to do with it. And some are very savvy, very sophisticated. They are already starting to use that across their campaign, but for a lot of them, they don't really make the most out of it. So how do you help them? And this can be another full episode as well, just on its own, but how do you, in a very short manner, explain how you get brands to understand the value of data and how they can leverage to really cut through the cluster and reach effectively and efficiently their consumer?
I think the key word there is value. So I think the way in which we discuss it with clients is about a value exchange with the consumer. So it's one thing to have data. There's good data and bad data. Using data, you should never forget that the end goal is to reach a consumer, but make sure there is a value exchange here. And the reason that privacy laws have come into place, and the reason that the cookie is looking to unfortunately disappear, is I think because users and consumers have felt that their privacy is being breached by the collection of data and the use, the increased usage of it. That being said, if there is an obvious value exchange between a brand and a consumer, then it can be very useful. It can be an extremely valuable way of reaching them and a much richer environment in which you can have a conversation with them. So if you think about if you're shopping for something online and you're served the same thing over and over and over again, or if you've had a bad experience with a product and a brand comes and tries to sell you that product again, it's not going to be a good experience. Chances are it'll turn you right off that brand and any loyalty has been lost. But if it can be used in an intelligent way in terms of marketing with the right product and providing offers which are relevant, then it becomes a very powerful tool. And really our discussion with clients is about how can you achieve that value exchange? How can you use data in a way which is not too intrusive, but at the same time provides a message which is relevant and is going to add value to the browsing experience of that consumer, to make them feel like they do actually have a connection with the brand and that it is adding value to their life in that moment.
Okay. You mentioned connection with the brand. So there are challenges with that, with the privacy laws, like, implemented by industry body or government. But now we're seeing more like corporation, like Apple, obviously, implementing those privacy changes. And with, as an example, Apple controlling like 40 to 60% of the market share when it comes to smartphone in, depending obviously of the market in Southeast Asia or APAC. How do brands really care about those privacy changes? And if they don't care, how do you educate them about the importance of, they might miss out on, very valuable audiences if they don't care about those privacy changes?
Yeah, I think pretty much all brands, certainly that we work with, certainly do care. I think the area we need to help them with is how to navigate that, like you said. How can you continue to use data in a way which is privacy compliant, ethical, and then also effective as well. So there is that bottom line which needs to be hit. And you mentioned earlier, there's also the element of needing to cut through that clutter and really be heard among many voices which are out in the marketplace at that one time. So it's about defining what is quality data and what is valuable to the brand in the first place in order to use that data more effectively, and then look at the ways in which it can be applied to advertising. So if the ability to use it is being cut off with a device or a specific platform, how else can we use that data in a more effective way? So that could be using things like clean rooms and uploading it and matching it with Google, or it could be matching it with Facebook, etc., and the large platforms which exist. Or it could be that we want to match it with much smaller publishers within a kind of conglomerate, and that's where a lot of the different unified IDs which are coming to the market come into play. They lack scale across APAC at the moment, but in the future, that's really what will allow the more effective and also privacy compliant use of data. And I think helping clients and brands navigate that space at the moment is what we're trying to do the most. Certainly around this area, but also just helping them navigate the different partners which exist. I think interconnectivity is one of the most important elements here, because if you don't have an ecosystem on the back end, which all talks to each other in a seamless way, if you can't pass that data and then measure the effectiveness of the data, then there's no point having it in the first place. But then the other problem is a lot of brands actually don't. You'd assume they do have lots of data and they have none whatsoever. And this could be because e-commerce platforms, they hold onto it very tightly, or in fact, they might not have a website which is that busy, and so they find it hard to collect the data. So the conversation with them is, how do we build a strategy which will allow you to collect first-party data in a compliant manner, store that data, and then obviously push it out to the market to help you activate campaigns more effectively.
So there's a lot to take on for brands, obviously, particularly with the pandemic and with markets slightly, slowly opening up. So if you were to, advise our audiences, on the type of opportunity that they will need to focus for this quarter, which is obviously the festive season, but also thinking about 2022, what are the 3 top opportunities that you can advise, that you can foresee?
That obviously depends very heavily on the specific brand we're speaking about, but I think the first one is partnerships. So making sure you have the right partnerships in place. I think InMobi, you've been very, very good at partnering very closely with us, making sure we're 100% aware of all of the different technologies you have and capabilities around targeting. Earlier, you mentioned new capabilities around gaming, the metaverse, different areas which have, I suppose, grown in popularity through the pandemic, and they were growing in the first place. But esports is one of the huge ones, and these are specific environments where consumers are spending a huge amount more time, and I think typically there's been a feeling that they're not brand safe and that it could be risky to be within there. But a lot of that has changed, and so education is really important. So making sure that you're educated and you're aware of the strengths and weaknesses of those platforms. And like you mentioned earlier, there's quite a few of them springing up, TikTok being one, Twitch another one. And then also making sure you have diversity in terms of how you target and where you target. So mobile is for APAC, we're mobile first in many markets. But also we spend, as consumers, huge amounts of time on our mobile devices. Gaming is a part of that reason. If you have Candy Crush or League of Legends, etc., that you can lose yourself for hours in them. These are very rich environments where brands can reach consumers in a way which can again add value to their lives in that respect, providing their close partnerships in place, a strategy around how to reach those consumers, and then also the right strategy has been put in place in terms of targeting and using data effectively there. So there's 3 elements, and I think the most important one is that partnership. So it's the partnerships with providers such as yourselves, technology platforms and providers, but also with the agencies you're working with. If you don't have a close partnership, then business goals may not be aligned. But keeping the consumer at the forefront of your mind at all times is one of the most important things. As long as you have that, as long as you have, I suppose, their needs and requirements in mind, and you're working towards reaching those with your business goals, obviously, then I think you'll achieve success.
Sounds amazing. Like, if I can summarize it well, partnership, diversity, and obviously putting the customer at the forefront of your strategy is definitely like the same applies with InMobi, the same applies with GroupM. I think the same applies for all those new platforms. No, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris, for joining us, for having a great chat with you. I hope you enjoy it. And I hope our listener will, walk away with some of those learning and insight. So thank you everyone for listening, for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, Valerie.